Humanity has always taken pride in the greatness of its intellect, yearning to use the sharp edge of reason to dissect every mysterious corner of the vast universe. Yet, we remain incredibly fragile, easily collapsing before the small pains hidden deep within our own souls. We are willing to spend an entire lifetime exhausting our minds in pursuit of distant truths, debating where all things began or where death leads us. Yet we hastily avoid facing a bleeding wound in the present reality. The supreme intelligence we so cherish sometimes turns into a perfect trap, imprisoning the mind in a labyrinth with no exit, thoughts, where we are preoccupied with finding the cause of pain instead of actually setting our hands to healing it. More than 2,000 years ago, beneath the silent canopies of ancient forests, there was a man who also struggled within such a trap of intellectual despair. He was a monk named Malunkyaputta. Upon embarking on a spiritual journey, he should have found tranquility and freedom. However, his mind was always boiling, like an invisible cauldron, with a series of grand metaphysical questions. He lost sleep night after night, relentlessly brooding over whether the world is eternal or finite, whether the soul and the body are one unified whole or two distinct entities, and whether an enlightened being continues to exist after their final breath or sinks into eternal nothingness. The weight of these unanswered questions grew so heavy that he sought out his teacher, the Buddha, carrying a defiant ultimatum. He resolutely declared that he would immediately discard his saffron robes and abandon his spiritual path if he did not receive a fundamental, satisfying answer to those philosophical problems. Facing his disciples' extreme frustration, the Buddha did not grow angry, nor did he rush to offer profound doctrinal lectures. He simply maintained a deep, profound silence. That silence was absolutely not the deadlock of someone who did not know the answer. Rather, it was the embodiment of the boundless compassion of a great physician who was pained to see his patient heading down the wrong path. In a soothing, gentle tone, the Buddha told the story of a man who was unfortunately struck by an arrow coated in deadly poison. When disaster struck, his relatives panicked and wept, rushing to summon the best doctor in the region to pull out the arrow and apply an antidote to save his life. But strangely, the victim vehemently waved them away, refusing treatment. Lying in a pool of blood, the man insisted on knowing exactly who shot him, whether they were from a noble or lowly family, what kind of wood the arrow was carved from, and how the poison was refined. The patient asserted that only when he knew the full truth about the arrow's origin would he allow the doctor to remove it. The inevitable and tragic end was that the poison seeped into his heart, taking his life long before any of his questions could be answered. The lesson hidden behind the story of the poisoned arrow is a profound awakening that strikes directly at the intellectual pride of humanity across all ages. Right now, in the rushing current of modern life, we too are carrying countless, invisible, poisoned arrows of anxiety, fear, resentment, jealousy, and deep-seated traumas that have never been healed. Instead of sitting down, closing our eyes, identifying the gnawing pain, and seeking a remedy, we rush out into the external world to blame our circumstances. We waste precious life energy analyzing causes from the distant past or frantically speculating about dire scenarios in a future that has not yet arrived. We long to understand the workings of the entire immense universe, yet we are completely blind to the small ripples of emotion within our own souls. To heal oneself, the first and most important step is not to analyze the root of why we hurt, but to sincerely tolerate and acknowledge that we are carrying a wound. When a burst of anger explodes, instead of frantically digging for logic to prove the other person wrong and yourself right, you simply need to pause for a moment. Return to observing your accelerating heartbeat. Feel the tension in your shoulders, the heat rising in your chest, and your hurried breath. Simply acknowledging the presence of anger without judgment is how you allow the great internal physician to begin pulling the poisoned arrow out of your body. True understanding does not come from winning an argument. It comes from the ability to recognize suffering the moment it sprouts. However, even when one has identified the poisoned arrow and is determined to embark on the path of self-cultivation, it is very easy to slide into mistaken extremes. Some choose to live a life of total abandonment, letting the flow of emotions and desires lead them, rationalizing it as freedom. Others, out of an intense craving for purity, force themselves into incredibly harsh disciplines, exhausting their physical strength in hopes of quickly uprooting all afflictions. This extreme psychological self-mortification was vividly illustrated through the life of the monk Sona. Before casting off fame to wear the monk's robes, Sona was an exceptionally talented musician, capable of plucking melodies that enchanted the human heart. When he entered the spiritual path with a burning fire of enthusiasm, he tormented himself with brutal ascetic practices. He practiced walking meditation continuously, day and night, to the point that his feet were torn and bleeding, and his body became as gaunt and haggard as a dry branch. Yet, ultimate peace remained a luxury that was vastly distant and out of reach. Standing on the brink of despair and beginning to harbor thoughts of abandoning the spiritual path, he was fortunate enough to have his heart understood by the Buddha, who called him forth for enlightenment. With wisdom that sees through all things, the Buddha gently reminded the former musician of the technique of playing the lute. He asked Sona what would happen if the strings were stretched too tight when preparing to play a piece of music. Without a second thought, that strings pulled too tight would surely snap and could not produce any sound. The Buddha smiled and asked about the case where the strings were too loose, and Sona explained that the resulting sound would be muddy, droning, and dull. The clearest and most melodious music only rings out when the artist knows how to tune the strings to just the right level, maintaining absolute balance, neither too tight nor too slack. That simple logic of playing the lute is also the deep resonance of liberation, a brilliant testament to the exquisite philosophy of the middle way. Excessive effort breeds tension, exhausting life energy, and turning humans into victims of perfectionism. On the other hand, laziness and indulgence lead to stagnation, causing the mind to sink into the fog of delusion. Both extremes are chains that bind humans to suffering. In a modern life full of invisible pressures, we frequently find ourselves caught in this snapped string state of mind. We force ourselves to be perfect at work. We force ourselves to always wear a positive smile, even when we are breaking inside. Even when we turn to meditation to seek peace, we place a massive pressure on our shoulders to immediately make the mind empty. The more you try to chase away cluttered thoughts, the more the mind struggles and screams in noise. Practicing the philosophy of the middle way in the midst of daily life does not require grand miracles. It begins with learning to smile at your own imperfections. When you notice yourself trying so hard that you are exhausted, with a chest heavy with worry, have the courage to allow yourself to stop, breathe deeply, and rest for a while without carrying any sense of guilt. When you realize you are lazily drifting into negative habits, gently awaken yourself, reminding yourself to return to a disciplined rhythm through the smallest and simplest actions. Do not blame yourself when you stumble. Do not be arrogant when you do well. Simply maintain a clear enough mindfulness to know everything that is happening and resiliently move forward. That is the perfect balance of a soul that has understood how to tune the strings of its own life. The wonder of the middle way is not only a compass for practical behavior, but also a light that illuminates the way to resolve deadlocks in human perception and thinking. When trying to define ourselves and interpret the world around us, it is very easy to fall into two dark pits of attachment, clinging to the concept of eternal existence, or believing in total disappearance without a trace. Someone once brought their curiosity to the Buddha, asking whether the human self truly exists forever through the flow of time. Faced with this question, the Buddha responded only with a penetrating silence. For if he answered yes, the questioner would immediately fall into a state of blind clinging. They would develop insatiable greed, wanting to hoard all wealth and fame to adorn that eternal self. They would tremble in fear of death and cling to ephemeral material things that are inherently in a state of flux and change. Conversely, when that person continued to ask if they were something that completely did not exist, that dying meant vanishing into a void, the Buddha remained steadfast in his compassionate silence. For if he answered that they did not exist, humans would immediately slide into the abyss of denying responsibility. They would assume that all actions, good or bad, leave no consequences, thereby living recklessly, trampling on morality and ignoring the fair cycle of cause and effect of all things. Both of these lines of thought are layers of fog obscuring the light of the truth of liberation. The danger of clinging to one-sided perspectives was vividly portrayed by the Buddha through the image of blind men being brought to touch an elephant for the first time. The man who happened to touch the massive leg loudly asserted that the true shape of an elephant is exactly like a sturdy house pillar. The Wandha who touched the long, slender tail argued heatedly that an elephant is actually just a swinging duster. The one lucky enough to touch the belly laughed at the ignorance of the other two and boldly claimed, "The elephant is a giant, warm wall of flesh." They plunged into fiery arguments, using the most hurtful words to insult one another, to defend the only truth they believed in. The most tragic and pitiful thing in this story is that everyone was holding a piece of the truth. No one was lying. But no one had a comprehensive enough vision to see the entire body of the vast elephant, looking deeply into life. Those who cling tightly to philosophical or religious theories, or tie themselves to personal viewpoints, are in a situation no less miserable than those blind men touching the elephant. We always have a tendency to cling to a tiny fragment of the truth, turning it into a sharp sword to attack and bring down those with different perspectives. Every day, every hour, countless brutal wars of words break out everywhere, from family conversations to high-pressure work environments, simply because everyone stubbornly believes that the fragile leaf they are holding is the shape of the entire vast forest. When you lock yourself in a fixed viewpoint and refuse to listen, you have personally stripped away the opportunity to see the diversity and wholeness of all things. The only way to undo this suffocating bond is to courageously nurture an extremely open mind, ready to put down the empty, prideful ego. Whenever you feel hot blood rushing to your face, preparing to dive into an argument to win, take a deep breath, fill your lungs, and sincerely ask yourself one thing. Ask yourself whether forcing others to admit you are right truly brings peace and serenity to your soul, or if it is just a spark that ignites an anger that burns away all human connection. When you are brave enough to let go of the intense need to always be right, you will immediately step into a space of silent, vast freedom like never before. In that shaded ancient garden long ago, after leaving a state of deep meditation, the Buddha slowly leaned over to pick up a few dry leaves that had fallen to the ground and held them in his palm. Looking at the monks with a gentle gaze, he calmly offered a beautiful comparison. He pointed out that the truth and wisdom encompassing this universe are infinite and countless, like the leaves of the entire giant forest surrounding them. However, the core teachings distilled and passed down are very few, as modest as the few small leaves lying in the palm of his hand. Those few small leaves, though they do not represent the entire knowledge of heaven and earth contain the ultimate and most necessary essence. That is the practical path that helps humans see through the source of suffering and provides specific methods of action to cut off the very roots of those agonizing pains. Understanding the intricate movements of the stars in the sky in no way helps you soothe the physical pain that is currently raging. Knowing the evolutionary history of all living species cannot help you stop the bitter tears when you must say a final goodbye to a loved one as they depart for the other side. True liberation never comes from turning the brain into a massive warehouse for hollow metaphysical theories. It only sprouts from the ability to return to the dark inner home, patiently sweeping away the sharp shards of attachment, hatred, and dark ignorance. This journey of transforming consciousness always requires extraordinary courage to shed old habits of thought that have taken deep root. It is exactly like being trapped in a wooden house that is burning fiercely. Your only and most urgent responsibility at that moment is to exert all your strength to find an emergency exit to preserve your life. Absolutely not to stand still with folded arms to study where the cruel fire originated, what material created it, or what the speed of the rising temperature is. Begin practicing the tolerant philosophy of balance by cherishing and living fully in every small moment passing by in the present. Do not fold your hands in prayer for excessive, distant things, but do not cowardly retreat or give up in the face of hardships. When storms of sadness and loneliness come knocking at your door, instead of locking your heart to resist, open your arms wide and receive them like a guest from afar. Light the lamp of mindfulness. Gently offer that guest a warm cup of tea. Take a step back to silently observe the sadness entering the mind and then naturally dissipating. When brilliant joys appear, allow yourself to be immersed and fully enjoy that sweet flavor, but absolutely do not let the mind cling or delude itself into hoping that joy will exist forever without fading. All things in the world, from a fragile leaf to the giant stars, operate according to the natural flow of the self, meaning what is born must one day wither and fall. The great silence of the enlightened one before distant, vacuous questions is the most complete and profound answer for us all. Instead of casting your eyes to the horizon to obsessively chase empty illusions that bring no liberation, gather the full power of your attention to return and feel every rising and falling beat in your own chest. Feel the cool stream of air entering and leaving through your nostrils, to see that the miracle of life is actually present, brilliant and whole, right in this very moment, when the thick fogs of pride and philosophical reasoning vanish into nothingness. The only thing remaining is the naked truth about the pains that need to be soothed and the bleeding wounds that need to be embraced and healed right in this present reality. Are you ready to let go of the clouds of vacuous debate, to stop all distant searches in the outside world, to courageously face and personally pull out the poisoned arrow that is planted deep within your heart.